everybody. Welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. It's November. It's Veterans Day, at least when this is going to be coming out. And of course, beforehand, before this discussion, as veterans ourselves, Nate and I were discussing ways to soundproof our offices. So, Nate, as you were, it came up because my cat was locked in my office, and I just got this sound dampening curtain or blanket that I hang up over the window so that my wife and child are not as subjected to this inanity than they have to be.
The sound of you running your mouth on a podcast.
Well, what ended up happening, so I have my normal podcasting that I do. You know, we do this one. I have a standing one on Thursday afternoon or Thursday evenings. And then during the week, obviously, I pick up other bonus stuff. And then last week, I also had to train a new guy at work. So I was talking constantly. Like I don't talk that much like in a week, let alone a day. So my wife and kid were home the whole time, and it's just, just listening to somebody else constantly have a conversation that you can't be a part of, and then talking behind a door can be irritating, I imagine. So I finally put this thing up, but yeah, now of course the cat who was in the office was trying to climb up the thing and just having a good old time flopping around and trying to tear up all my shit, as a cat generally does. So he's out finally, hopefully. And my wife says that it's better. It's not, perfect. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to hermetically seal myself in in an office quite yet. Planning on building a podcasting studio in the basement of some kind. So,
yeah.
So I'm going to be coming to you for tips on that.
Yeah, man, I have a lot of experience with that now because we've both done it ourselves, and we've finally, for our new space, we've hired people to do it. And there's just some certain materials that people use, but depending on what you're using it for, it's really just like building a room within a room and having it isolated as much as possible from vibration, so that when you make noise, it can't vibrate and people can't hear it. So this is related more to Trash Future than to Hell of a Way, obviously, but fans of the show will know that I live in the United Kingdom, and in the initial months of living in the United Kingdom and producing a show that was recording in person twice a week with 4 people plus a guest typically at the time, I was very frustrated by the inability to control for like location, because it, whether it was a table outside at Riley's place or it was the like living room, kitchen, dining room, open area in Milo's place, which was very, echoey, could never have a consistent sound. And so I found this place, and we pooled some money together to get to rent this room in a co-working space. It was a basement with windows. Like, it was a basement, but like the windows it wasn't super deep, we'll put it that way. So like the windows came down to like chest height on me. So it had plenty of daylight. It just was the sort of lower ground floor, if you will. And yeah, we damped the hell out of that thing. And what I learned was that, just having a room full of stuff with carpets and foam on any bare walls, that definitely deadened it a lot, and it made a huge difference. And I think long term, we would have stayed there for as long as we needed to until we were in a position to get like a more permanent location. But the company that was running it just randomly went out of business during the pandemic. They were doing co-working space, and they just like were massively overextended, and they were really bad at running a business. Like, they managed to suck at being landlords.
Was it the British WeWork?
Oh, it was like an alternate to British WeWork. It was called, we wound up renting from real British WeWork not too long after, but for a while. We just moved out of that space. But this company was called Ministry of Startups. And it was so bad, like so badly done. Nothing made sense. But we got a room in a basement for £450 a month. And at the time, that was our first month of having it, that was like the full payout of our Patreon. But we were like, fuck it, whatever, let's just do it. And then there was a sewer gas leak, like not like fuel gas, but like fumes from the sewer that was making that room smell like fucking shit every time someone flushed the toilet.
I remember that, yeah.
What I realize now is it was actually as a simple fix. They just, the pipe just needed to be capped, and they just hadn't done that.
Yeah.
But what someone did was they stuffed it full of like toilet roll. But over the course of a month or so, that toilet roll like turned black because there was so much gross shit getting pumped into that room. And they tried to argue with us, and they were like, no. See, this is actually, you guys are just smelling the bathroom like from the hallway. And I was like, no, I promise you, dude. Like the windows and door will be closed. You walk in there, and it smells like you're inside the sewer system. And one day, one of them went in and smelled it, and he was like, okay, you're right, I get it.
Yeah, that's the smell of sewer gas is much different than the smell of somebody taking a healthy shit.
Yeah, someone drops a deuce, like, yeah, you know it, but like, yeah, sewer fumes. I have removed toilets to replace wax rings many a time in the past. Mm-hmm. I know what sewer fumes smell like, and it is not that. And so they let us take this bigger room but keep the same price, and so that was the room, you know, as long as we just like cleaned up the old one. So that was the space we got, and we stayed there for 2 years, I think, almost, thereabouts 2 years. But then randomly, we knew they were having some financial trouble. And then randomly, out of nowhere, on a Tuesday morning, we got an email from them, and they're like, yeah, we're going into liquidation. And as of midnight on Friday night, we will no longer be in possession of the lease. So you may not have access to the building anymore. We're not sure. So we're like, oh, so what you're saying is in exactly... call it, let's be generous here, let's call it 85 hours, we have to be out or we'll lose access to all of our stuff. And
that sounds about right.
All right, sick. So we called up British WeWork, which is a company called Workspace, and rented a place from them. We managed to finagle it and get a contract signed that day and get the keys the next day. And then I want to say on that Thursday, like day into night, me and Milo and one of Milo's friends and Hussein and Riley just like packed a fucking van full of shit and did multiple trips and brought it over to that place. Thank God that building had a loading dock and what you'd call a service lift here, like a what's the right word? Like a freight elevator?
Yeah, freight elevator. A bigger, shittier elevator that it doesn't matter if you fuck up the walls in.
Yeah, it was funny because it smelled like an old army building. Yeah. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. That smell of like old coffee and old cigarettes and just like lubricants and oils. Mm-hmm. Like that smell. Like I remember because all the buildings on Patch Barracks when I was a kid, when my dad was stationed there in Germany, smelled like that. And like all army buildings in like Camp Atterbury smell like that. I don't know what it is, but there's just that army building smell.
Yeah, and there's a certain amount of like leaded paint and decay and water damage and the bodies of dead cockroaches that really just like exhume to each other and come up with this fragrance that and you got to add a dash of Simple Green on top of it, and you've got your army perfume right there.
And so we finally found a place we could secure for a long term, and we're in there now, and we're actually doing renovations. And hopefully by the end of this week, the major works will all be done. But we now have a place we no longer have to worry about getting evicted from for the time being, at least. And we are in the process of having it like professionally soundproofed, which is interesting. Because there's some of it is elementary, like it seems like okay, I see how that makes sense, and some of it is like full on alchemy. So, we're just kind of deferring to that. And, but yeah, man, it's been weird. It's, I have somehow become a subject matter expert on how to make people's microphone voices not sound bad, which is funny because like my home setup is not great. So you'd think I'd be the expert and I would have like the flyest setup at home, just like you'd think that like professional chef must cook insane fly meals at home when he's not at work. And instead it's like, no, he's making grilled cheese sandwiches and his kitchen kind of sucks. That's kind of where I'm at.
The worst houses like that people live in are generally owned by contractors. I've noticed like the multiple people that I've known that are general contractors or that I've hired as general contractors, like they're people, they're friends and stuff, but like I go over to their houses and I'm like, your house is like I can see that you was just like, I'm going to buy this house. It's kind of run down. I'm going to get it for cheap and I'm going to fix it up. And then they never get to it, which I get because do you think that I fix computers when I'm not fixing computers for my regular job? Of course not, because it's my fucking job. I don't want to do that in my downtime. But it's got kind of the same concept.
Yeah, I mean, for me,
I wonder if in the future though, like, because eventually I am going to build something in the basement, and with American building codes, it's like we need to put for it to count like as a fourth bedroom in the house. It would have to have an egress window, which is like a couple grand to get that installed. And that's because it's in the basement. So an egress window, if you don't know, like you have those small windows in the basement. An egress window is a big one that you could climb out of in case of an emergency, in case of fire or something, right? So it's supposed to be another exit. So I would have to have one of those put in, and then I have to like build a box downstairs and insulate it and drywall it and all this other stuff. And I was like, man, if I could just like build, like, you remember those in the Army when you would go get your hearing test and you had to get into a soundproof box. If I could make that about twice the size, I think like that's all I need. I just need a box that I can go in, because like you were saying, like the professional setups and everything like that. We've been doing this officially now for 5 years. The podcast has been going on. It's Veterans Day. I started up on Veterans Day 5 years ago. So here we go. And
because this thing happened in America and this random guy became president and a lot of troops came out of the woodwork being insanely right wing and pro fascism.
Mm-hmm.
And we, decided to try to. We're not, and we wanted to present an alternate voice. And I don't necessarily know how welcome that voice is now, but I think at the time, a lot of people who were, call it, center left to left curious, were interested in hearing from troops who weren't right wing, but also who weren't just like, that's why you need to vote kind of liberals, you know what I mean? And so...
Well, we also operate in a space where like we can be anti-army but pro-troop, which is how we've always been, and very like I love soldiers in general, because I was one and I understand them. I understand our fucked up brains, but I hate the fucking army. The army sucks dick, and it should be completely dissolved and rebuilt into just a logistics branch of the government. But nobody's asking me for my opinions on these things.
Anyway, so soundproof rooms.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering if like one day when I end up selling this house, when I'm no longer here, if like I can list that I have a podcasting room in the basement. Like, because I'm not going to move from here. At least like my wife and I have talked about like we don't want to move for decades, but also like just living here, we see the things is like, well, I mean, this house is good, but here's like I wish that there was a second, like a lot of the houses in my neighborhood have a second story, and it's like one of those half second stories where it's just got like an extra room and a bathroom upstairs, and like that'd be nice. Or having a backyard that is like fenced in that I could let the dog run around. I don't have that currently, and I can't build that without building a new door outside. So there's a lot of different things that we'd want to change. But also one day, if in 5 years, and I'm like, yeah, we're gonna move, and we're going into our 10th year of podcasting, and it's just like, yeah, I have a professional podcasting booth set up downstairs. Yeah, like I know, like, cause what's the bit? Everybody does like TikToking and Instagram reels and videos and all this stuff now. Like that's the big thing. Building a studio in your house is not one, it's not hard, and two, could be a selling point later on for your influencer.
I mean, I would say. Hoping that the influencer thing is not the primary selling point, but God knows it might be. I think the thing that I would recommend is that, the sort of my conception of the American housing market being what it is, that if you did have windows in your basement and you were able to do that, have a soundproofed or at least sound damped space where conversations, like the way to the level of how animated we get podcasting didn't, get leaked out, people couldn't hear you elsewhere in the house. That could also be a selling point, assuming it has some natural light as a kind of like work from home space. So even if you're not podcasting, you know what I'm saying? Like folks could work from home and have like a space that's been treated so that like noise from the outside and noise on the inside doesn't really interact. And I think that could be useful.
It would. The plan is to build a basement office. And the big problem is, as you mentioned, is natural light, which there is not a lot of. But also, like where my kids. Like my kid's room should be the office, just to kind of separate, because her room is like in the middle of the house, and this is not a big house. So like, we want to move her into the office room, and then I would have an office downstairs. So we have been kind of just like, I mean, do we really like? We don't need an egress window right now. We're not trying to sell the house, so we could just build out the thing in the basement. And the windows downstairs are like big enough that in an emergency, I could break the windows and climb out if I had to. So I'm not too concerned with.
Yeah, it's funny because my house as a kid, well, a young, like preteen, and then all the way until I graduated high school, we had a basement and it didn't have any windows. Like it had a space where windows normally would have gone in most houses, but like there was no egress from that basement.
Was it like bricked up, or was it they just
Yeah,
didn't build?
it was bricked up on the outside, and on the inside you couldn't see anything. Like the way that the drywall, it had a drop ceiling as well. Like I think that
Okay.
where the window would have been or had been before would have been visible through the roof, the ceiling tile from the drop ceiling. But it was, yeah, I mean, it was kind of grim. It was that house sold not that long ago, and I was able to see like how the people who owned it before had renovated it on like Zillow or whatever. And yeah, I mean, that basement still looks, it's not quite Austrian torture basement, but you know what I mean? It still looked pretty grim. It was sick as hell when we were teenagers though, because you like stay up all night, you know, drinking a 24 pack of Coke and playing like WCW wrestling on N64 and fall asleep. And then you just wake up after noon because no natural light can get in. That was pretty cool. But now I think that would be depressing.
It and that's been the, like, you know, now also because my wife, her father moonlighted as a personal accountant during the tax season. So he worked during the day, and then he had a basement office where he worked at night, and there's no natural light down there. And I'm hoping that now that we have like, you know, like we have nice fluorescents that mimic daylight, it won't be as sad down there. But, you know, also if it just turns into like, I don't know, just the man cave or whatever, I think that would also be fine. Just a place to like hang out and play video games and you know, podcast. I say this as a nearly 40-year-old man, but
I know it's crazy, right? I mean, I've been feeling the same way recently, that, you know, there's a certain change in affect that comes from realizing you're pushing 40, and there are people over 40 who are completely bananas on social media, and I just don't want to be one of them. And, you know, sometimes I tell myself, like, yes, I'm a podcaster. I mean, I'm a professional podcaster at this point, and you know, engineer, but it's a little bit wild, but, you know, it's working out. But I would say for us, like, our basement for the new studio doesn't have any windows, but, you know, what I found with that is that actually sometimes using softer lights and lamps can be better to make it just seem less, you know, like germ research facility with a super bright fluorescence. And yeah, and then I guess to get here, I have to either ride my bike for about 25, 27 minutes, or, you know, take public transit and walk, and that takes about 45 minutes total. And so, like, at least to get to the space, I have to be out in the sunlight or out in the day. You know what I mean? And it's not just like roll out of bed in my dark cave and go to work in my dark cave. Like, there's stuff forcing me to get out and do stuff. And so that's helpful. But, you know, Francis, because we have to keep it on topic marginally, do you know where there is no daylight at all?
Under the ocean?
Under the ocean, in a submarine that's been submerged. But you know what's bad if you're in a submarine that's submerged?
I mean, I would imagine that having the hull of my submarine be weakened for any reason would be bad.
Yeah, I think especially when there's tests in place to determine the strength of welds and the steel exoskeleton of a submarine. But somebody decides to fake them because they think the test is stupid.
Which, like, and this news article from military.com also comes like a week, maybe 2 weeks after like a submarine ran into something, and like a submarine underwater hitting something solid and everybody not dying is a very like, whoa, you guys are very lucky that everybody didn't die in this fucking tin can after you hit a mountain underwater that you didn't know about.
Well, yeah, because I think one of the things that people don't realize, or maybe you would realize, it's pretty self-explanatory when you consider it. It's just that the depth that these things operate at means there's a significant amount of pressure against it, and any impact collision that could jeopardize the strength of the hull, you know, could then in turn mean that like all of a sudden everything crumples. You know, it's not quite as dramatic as like poking a balloon with a pin, but it's the same concept.
Yeah, like
massive
in space,
change in pressure.
Yeah, in space, you know, spaceships, they worry about getting a hole in the hull because you're going to have explosive decompression. This would just be explosive compression because you just got all this weight of the water on you, and it's incredible that we've managed to create these tubes that don't crush the people that are inside of them. Although sometimes they do end up crushing the people inside of them.
Yeah, well, so in this case, the U.S. military, the Navy, the Department of Defense have strength tests on the welds and on the steel.
Well, and we have strength tests on everything, which is an important, like, we have heat tests, we have strength tests, we have, shoot stuff at it and see what it does kind of tests. Like, there's all kind of tests to make sure that these things, when, in encountering an enemy situation or when encountering some kind of any combat or anything like that, that it could, possibly not kill everybody inside. And I would think, like, for an MRAP and stuff, things that you just drive around in, there's, the V-shaped hull and everything. But, like, you get hit by an IED, like, you don't have the problem of the MRAP completely collapsing in on itself. So this is a little different. So we have this metallurgist admits faking steel test results for Navy subs.
Yeah, so I'm just going to read because this is very funny because this is a very, call it perfunctory, to the point article, but it ends with a hilarious quote that to me is, the person involved who's pled guilty is not a troop, not a sailor, not a Joe, junior enlisted, but this is the most specialist answer I've ever heard in my entire life. And it's so funny. I mean, I say that from a position of love and respect. All right, so
we say this from a position of this person's negligence does not seem to have gotten anybody killed, so it's okay to laugh at it. But also, I don't like. We're going to see if this
it's bad,
the negligence
but it's also
gets somebody
very
killed.
Funny.
It is.
All right, so Dateline Seattle. A metallurgist in Washington state pleaded guilty to fraud Monday after she spent decades faking the results of strength tests on steel that was being used to make U.S. Navy submarines. Elaine Marie Thomas, 67, of Auburn, Washington, was the director of metallurgy at a foundry in Tacoma that supplied steel castings used by Navy contractors Electric Boat and Newport News Shipbuilding to make submarine hulls. From 1985 through 2017, Thomas falsified the results of strength and toughness tests for at least 240 productions of steel, about half the steel the foundry produced for the Navy, according to her plea agreement filed Monday in U.S. District Court in Tacoma. The tests were intended to show that the steel would not fail in a collision or in certain, quote, wartime scenarios, unquote, the Justice Department said.
Very, very important tests. Again, very important tests for the thing that's underwater. Like, if these were like, oh, the steel tests on this tanker truck were kind of falsified, whatever. Like, it's a tanker truck. This is a fucking submarine. This is underwater, and you can't be any dipshit to be a submariner either. Like, I don't think first off, I'm not crazy enough to be a submariner, but also, like, you have to go through psychological tests and stuff, I believe, to
Well, yeah, it sucks on a submarine, so, like, you have to kind of make sure that you're not going to crack when you go on one and you're, like, underwater for
imagine
weeks.
Being in a room with, like, a couple hundred other soldiers constantly sniffing each other's farts. And, like, that's 6 months of your life.
There was a thing that I think they called it the bullpen or the snake pit or something like that, but that was the smoking area of a submarine. And I want to say in the last 20 years or so, the Navy's gotten rid of those. Like, they just don't have them anymore. You can't smoke on submarines at all. And can you imagine if you were, like, year 19 career Navy, NCO, and you were on a submarine and you were used to be able to smoke all the time on the sub, and now you can't? God, I would lose my mind.
I feel like at that point, like, submarines, and I don't know, maybe if you're a submariner, contact me. We'll bring you on and talk about being on a submarine. But I feel like submarines, because they operate in such like a, it's like aviation compared to the rest of the military. They're kind of, aviation is a little bit different. They get to act a little bit different because they're aviation. I feel like submariners probably get to do the same thing. So I imagine that 19-year Navy chief, so they're like, Chief, you can't smoke in here anymore. And they're like, I will go fucking smoke wherever the fuck I want, and you will not tell me otherwise. Go ahead, kick me off the submarine. I'm the only one who knows how to make this thing work. So I feel like the phase out process probably, allowed the crusty NCOs to continue to smoke until they, had to get out because they have too much lung cancer for some reason.
Yeah, well, let's continue this story because, like I said, it ends on a very funny note. There was no allegation that any submarine hulls failed, but authorities said the Navy had incurred increased costs and maintenance to ensure they remained seaworthy. The government did not disclose which subs were affected. Thomas faces up to 10 years in prison and a $1 million fine when she is sentenced in February. However, the Justice Department said it would recommend a prison term at the low end of whatever the court determines is the standard sentencing range in her case. In a statement filed in U.S. District Court on her behalf Monday, her attorney, John Carpenter, said Thomas, quote, took shortcuts, unquote. Quote, Ms. Thomas never intended to compromise the integrity of any material and is gratified that the government's testing does not suggest that the structural integrity of any submarine was in fact compromised, Carpenter wrote. Quote, this offense is unique in that it was neither motivated by greed nor any desire for personal enrichment. She regrets that she failed to follow her moral compass. Admitting to false statements is hardly how she envisioned living out her retirement years, unquote. Thomas's conduct came to light in 2017 when a metallurgist being groomed to replace her noticed suspicious test results and alerted their company, Kansas City-based Bradkin Incorporated, which acquired the foundry in 2008. Bradkin fired Thomas and initially disclosed its findings to the Navy, but then wrongfully suggested that the discrepancies were not the result of fraud. That hindered the Navy's investigation into the scope of the problem, as well as its efforts to remediate the risks to sailors, prosecutors said. In June 2020, the company agreed to pay $10.9 million in a deferred prosecution agreement. When confronted with the doctored results, Thomas told investigators, quote, yeah, that looks bad, unquote, the Justice Department said. She suggested that in some cases she changed the tests to passing grades because she thought it was, quote, stupid, unquote, that the Navy required the test to be conducted at negative 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Fair.
I mean...
But also, it like you said, it's the most specialist answer because it is saying, like, this is not for greed or desire for personal enrichment.
It's just being lazy, which is very funny to me.
Right. It's just like, this seems dumb. Why are we testing it like this? You're never going to... And of course, this is a military.com. So we have comments to read as well.
Oh, we have comments. I totally forgot about that. Are comments enabled on this?
You have to log in. You have to log in.
No, you don't have to log in. You can read through super grayed out text if you really wanted to.
Well, I'm logged in, so it's fine. Many of the comments, of course, are suggesting that she get hanged for putting the troopies at risk. Go figure. Who would know that the troopies might be at risk at any point in time. If it was done neither motivated by greed nor desire for personal enrichment, then she must have done it for fun. Maybe. Let's see. We also have 50 years in prison. Dishonest people today. Sign of the times. All the fantastic boomer stuff. But here's where Nighthawk 572 speaks for me on this one. She was not dishonest. She just thought the test parameters were stupid. When is a sub going to run into 100-degree minus temperatures? Seawater freezes at 28 degrees Fahrenheit, so all the water a sub would encounter would be warmer than that. If it sits on the surface, then the air temperature might come close to 100 below, but the sub would not be in any danger of sinking because it would be on the surface. So the sub on the surface of the water would not sink because it's on the top of the water, apparently. And you know what? I'm not a metallurgist. I'm not a sailor. I do not get on the water for a reason because I fear drowning. So obviously, I would also not get into a submarine. But 100-degree minus temperatures. When are you going to come across that? This is our world is getting warmer, first off. So all of this is completely out the window. You're never going to come across 100 below degree temperatures. So Nighthawk is correct. We need to be worried more about like 200-degree temperatures. Here, this one. This is pure disgust. She should hang. How many of our best has she put in harm's way? But our best is capitalized.
Yeah, I saw.
I mean, this one that just came in 9 minutes ago. Biden's DOJ recommends a prison term at the low end of what the court decides. ... figures, but Biden is spelled with an X.
Yeah,
instead of a B
because it's Xi Jinping. It's Zidane.
Okay,
apparently, so apparently these
I thought
guys,
it was a gender thing. So. I'm learning.
That could be. I presume that's it. There's so many like weird neologisms that you start learning from boomer veteran coterie of military.com commenters. I mean, yeah, the top voted comment basically says she should get the maximum every count. She should hang. She should get the mass sentence. Someone says something to the effect of, like, who needs China to sink us? Oh, there it is. We have met the enemy and he is us. Pogo from Walt Disney. With this kind of stuff, when needs China to sink us? What?
When needs China to sink us?
When needs China to sink us?
I asked
myself this question.
Yeah, there's also Russians pay her for that? No, China. Thank you, Sergeant Curmudgeon.
Yeah, there it is.
China and Russia, the boogeymen who will never go away from the diseased mind of the boomer veteran.
Oh, speaking of which, I just saw something before we do need to continue to talk about this because it's very funny. But now there's another military.com story that I know is going to be great in terms of the comments alone, because it says headline: Navy launches ship named for gay rights leader Harvey Milk. Now, Harvey Milk was in the Navy. I know for a fact that Harvey Milk served in the Navy, and I believe he was a World War II veteran. But he absolutely was in the Navy before. I believe that. Actually, maybe not. I mean, they're naming them after people who weren't in the military. Anyway, yes. Okay, I take that back. Harvey Milk was in the military. He was given a less than honorable discharge because he was gay, but he was a Navy veteran. Let's see. Oh, military.com. Why you turn the comments off on this one? Oh, you know exactly why. You know exactly why, but like I want my Facebook uncle comments. Come on, guys. How are you going to do this to me?
And this is I believe that this really should be a military.com should really like have a inward look on itself when they're like, okay, we need to talk about the Harvey Milk ship, but also we know that as soon as we do that, the comment section is going to turn into just an absolute shit show. We have to turn it off because the people who read our shit are all insane. And like, what military.com should do is just do what Task and Purpose did and just lean into it and just be like, I don't give a shit. We're going to talk about these things and you can go fuck off, which I've always appreciated Task and Purpose for. Military.com turning comments off, though, is some weak-ass coward shit.
I was surprised when I looked at the article about the first female graduate of sniper school and what's it called? Everyone is surprisingly they are not as uniformly angry. The really salty ones are complaining that the person involved is in the National Guard and therefore the slot was wasted on sending her to sniper school. But other people someone has managed to work a pro-Soviet Union angle. Wasn't surprised at that. Quote, the Russians must be laughing themselves sick, having had crack, meaning multiple confirmed kills, female snipers throughout World War II. So only about 75 years behind the times.
Fair enough. I thought it was going to be something, but no, like the Soviets let anybody kill people. Like they didn't give a shit.
Yeah, but that one's been downvoted three times as well as upvoted 4 times. And this one replies, the difference is that there was a war fought on Russian soil. Everyone fought, men, women, and children. We have always had the luxury of sending rough men ready to do horrible things into war zones and not our country. War to Americans has always been a, quote, men's sport, unquote. But when war comes to your shores, everyone fights. If there was an invasion tomorrow of our country, you can bet my daughters, nieces, and nephews would all have the ability to lay down the commie hordes with accurate fire at distance. The problem is we have resolve. Most Americans lack the, quote, resolve to do what is needed to win a war. But the commie hordes, but you're praising the Soviet Union,
a country that has not existed for 30 years.
It hasn't existed since 1991. But also, you're talking about the commie hordes. But in this case, the commie hordes were the citizens of the Soviet Union defending themselves. So I don't know. And then someone replies, "Of course, she graduated. Nobody wanted a career-ending OER." All right, guys. You know what? I must say.
For the most progressiveness that I see in military comments now is the tweet about more female guards. It's just like more women should kill brown people for us. Have more women in these combat roles. It's like she's doing it for ourselves. It's like she can now explode the head of a 14-year-old child from fucking a mile away. Yay! Like
I think you can see that put to its most ludicrous extreme when this sort of thing gets brought up about the fact that the Israeli military drafts both men and women, and you'll see that kind of thing put forth, and it's just sort of like, without derailing the conversation into a discussion of the occupation, you effectively see this sort of thing be like, isn't this a victory for women? It's like, you've basically threatened them with prison if they don't join the military, and now you've taught them to do killer shit just like men. Is that a victory for feminism? Your guess is as good as mine.
I mean, the draft, and the one of the reasons why I'm surprised the draft hasn't made it back is because the draft is an easy way to force young people into military service and immediately begin brainwashing them. against, because I mean, you remember basic training. What is it? It's a bunch of dudes teaching you how to kill and teaching you how to yell kill and teaching you how to other people so that you can kill them. And it just makes it easier for you to be ready to go out and do some dark shit out there. So I'm surprised, like the fact that America hasn't like woken up, like the powers that be haven't woken up to like, oh, we could force these people to join the military and then just make them do whatever, make them just start our propaganda early on the kids rather than letting them go to college and possibly become, I don't know, whatever conservatives are concerned about, become like a Che Guevara communist or something while going to Mizzou. I don't know. It like you said, in Israel, that's I don't know if that's one of the plans, but it is definitely one of the side effects, is that it just turns anybody in, it gives the government 2 years to just beat you over the head with propaganda. So
yeah, I mean, it is definitely like an ideology factory. And I think that, I have been to and spent a decent amount of time in countries with mandatory conscription. And those are South Korea, Thailand, and Turkey. And, in Thailand, we did a training exercise with the Thai military. And, it became pretty obvious to me that, fancy people either avoided the draft or became officers, and working class people got drafted. In Turkey, similarly, and in South Korea, to an inordinate extent, military service. Granted, it's just for men, but it's military service is really, really integral in South Korea towards sort of like fomenting this intense nationalism. And obviously, fancy people, they're out in a society where you are actually discriminated against if you don't do your military service. Is this thing called the KATUSA program, Korean Army Augmentee to the United States Army, where they get soldiers serving in basically U.S. Army billets, but they're Korean soldiers doing their military service. And they are selected because they can speak English, which, if you have the ability to speak English fluently by the time that you are 20, when you get drafted, chances are really good that you have a fancy background, and it's not an easy program to get into. But I just recall this, to your point, and to a larger point that we've talked about in the past about the sort of veteran ideology or veteran mentality that forms the basis of this show. I knew a lot of guys in Korea who were English teachers, both, in private schools, what they call Hagwon, like the cram schools, and then also in universities, who actually taught college classes. The guys who taught college courses had an interesting perspective on this, because oftentimes they got students before their military service and after. Like, they would get them for their first 2 years of university, then they would go and do their military service, which is about 2.5 years, and then they get out and they come back and they finish university. And I remember having conversations with these guys about this. And one of the points they made was that, like, when they got these 18, 19-year-old kids, they were, like kind of goofy and funny and sweet and genuinely just sort of like perfectly nice, in their classes. And then when they came back from the military service, it was like, they were like super chauvinistic. They were super, what's the right word? Like kind of like dismissive towards female students, and very, very dismissive towards foreign instructors. And it's just sort of like, yeah, because they go into the army to learn how to be, in a lot of ways, to just be dickheads. And that's easy for me to say and not have to look over my shoulder, because I was also in the army, but I was never in the Korean army. But you see the way that the Korean military, for example, the way conscripts are treated and the total lack of freedom they have. If I remember correctly, the only time off they ever get during their conscript service is they get a 4-day weekend each time they get promoted. And that's it. They get almost no money. They make like $75, $80 a month, I think. It might be a little more than that, but it's genuinely, I can say for a fact that the conscript wages in the Korean military are under $2,000 a year. Like, they make next to nothing. Now, everything's provided to them in the sense that, like, housing and food and stuff is given to them, but they make almost no money.
Yeah, and that is also another tactic of making them rely on the government.
And when they get time off, they have to go out in their uniforms and stuff. They basically don't get to wear civilian clothes ever. It's hard. And it genuinely, on top of being sort of like, this reserve manpower thing, is also an ideology factory. And I think about this sometimes, like, we have our own version of it, but it's, in a way, we're the bigger suckers because we joined voluntarily. And, breaking out of that ideology factory, if you will, has sort of been like the point of this show, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Over the 5 years we've been doing this, that, I have often, perhaps flippantly, used the expression debathify yourself, like basically remove that ideology factory remnants from your brain. And it's hard because I think that, like, us reading from the military.com comments proves that this stuff is lifelong, long lasting. It makes you nuts. And it's not a surprise to me that older people, many of whom are from generations where there was conscription in the US, wind up being pretty indoctrinated to it. And I think I gotta stop talking because I've been going on for a while, but I'll leave you with this one point, Francis. Years ago, when we had a friend of the show, an all-around great guy, Spencer Rapone, on, we promoted some posts on Facebook to try to get people to listen to the show. And some of them used previews of our conversation with him. And I remember very clearly getting what I would describe as like call the cops level violent fantasy death threats from a guy who was like a little too old to have been in Vietnam and had been drafted in like the late 50s and 60s. And he lived in Portland, and he had identified on his Facebook profile as very liberal and was like supporting the Democratic Party. He had, like, I'm not joking, in his profile picture had dyed his hair blue. And he's like, well, I was trained to give commies 2 in the chest and 1 in the head, and I'll make sure that I do that as long as my hands can carry a rifle. And I'd be like, you sound like a fucking psycho. But this is a guy who's like, oh yeah, by the way, animal rights, and I'm a vegan, and fucking, I support this like rabbit sanctuary in Portland and shit. And it's like all nice stuff. But like that, there was like a hardwire circuit in his brain that saw anything even remotely supportive of communism or socialism, and it made him immediately be like, I must kill. And
right.
like, that's like the stuff of a stupid movie cliche. Like, that's like the stuff that got cut from the script of a terrible, notional anti-war Ryan Phillippe movie in the mid 2000s level of bad. But like, I saw that. And I mean, like, that was me behind the account fucking making fun of this guy. And it was wild to me. It made me realize that, like, yeah, that there's, don't ever think that you're exempt from propaganda or brainwashing or indoctrination, or whatever you want to call it. And it takes work to sort of, for lack of a better term, revise those prior, conceptions you had of the world, which is what we're trying to do.
I was going to say, I've been officially out of the Army for a year, but like mentally kind of checked out of the Army for about 4 or 5 years. And and it is a like that. Really debathifying my brain is one of the biggest purposes of this podcast, is to talk out a lot of the fucked up shit that they tried to teach me. And like, some of it, you're just like, it's fun. Me and the guys hanging out, shooting guns, kicking in doors, doing a lot of fun stuff. But then you remember some of the things that were said to you that you just kind of took at face value, like the enemy are just a bunch of mindless hordes. And for a while I was doing a lot of research into just like propaganda from from World War I, and it's all, and you see the exact same thing happening today. It's all the exact same words, just pointed at a different group of people or the same group of people. It doesn't really matter. So it is a chance to grapple and come to grips, I guess, with everything that a 20 years in the military kind of did. And I'm public affairs, so I wasn't fully into all the combat shit, and my last unit was not super military. Like, it was a logistics group. It didn't really do rah army stuff, and also reserve. So 1 weekend a month, we weren't that big into being soldiers. But also there's just a lot that gets pumped into your brain, especially when you go to Iraq or Afghanistan. Like, it's like they need the 2 months of training is like, yeah, we're going to teach you how to kick indoors, but also we need to teach you that 1% of Iraq is insurgents. And if you take a look at 30,000 or 30 million people, and so 1% of that is 300,000 people want to kill you. And that is just like the most fucked up like thing to tell somebody. Like, all right, now we're going to send you into this country. By the way, 1% of them want to kill you, but the rest of them don't kill them. They're just normal, regular people. Like, it did not. It just like kind of buries a constant fear, I guess, is what the Army tries to always instill in you. And that's what this guy from Portland has. He's still, even though that person is all about bunny rescues or whatever, and all about eating vegan and all about progressive or liberal policies, there is still a deep ingrained fear that has been burned into that person's brain about commies and socialism. And it's like, if ever you got these people to sit down and define it, they wouldn't be able to, but they just know that it's a bad thing, and that it's the idea is that it's going to take everything away. And like, look, we've never been, this show has never been pro like Stalin or anything. And I understand some of the propaganda that was put out during the Cold War, and it's like, that's the shit that you need to get rid of, because like, that's not what we're trying to do here. We're just trying to make sure everybody can eat and have a place to sleep and stuff. There's you're right, there's just a lot of garbage that gets jammed into our brains, and like, you're not even thinking about it. And if you're not going to look at those things critically, if you're not going to say, well, what did these people teach me, and do those things that they teach me, do they match up with the way that I see things and my own research, and just like the morality that I have? Do these things link up to each other? And sometimes you find out no, and then you do your own research, you do your own political history searching, and you start to see like, wow, everybody's been lying for a very long time. And one of the most I don't know what word to describe it, but I guess maybe one of the disappointing things when you become an adult is you realize that like all the adults that are in charge are the biggest pieces of shit who don't care if you live or die. They care about polling numbers, and that's just what it is. These people don't give a shit. So I don't know. I'm ranting. The coffee finally hit my brain, so it's churning right now.
I think that we have used this show to talk about stuff that's relevant to us, and we want to continue exploring sort of funny and absurd sides of things about the military and dumb scandals, but also just like the very, very funny stuff. And we never want to lose sight of the fact that like, this is an anti-joining the military podcast. This is an anti-military service podcast. This is a show where we encourage you to not be in, and if you are in, to leave. But we also understand that there is a, pretty profound amount of interest and curiosity about sort of who those folks are, and it's not necessarily being served by just like, we'll call it, oversimplification. So, my hope is that, this is the start of 5 more years of this, dumb bullshit. And I will just say, Francis, before we plug the bonus, it's been great so far. So, here's to 5 more years.
It's been fun. And, I have no idea, like, podcasting is still relatively like new in general. It's less than, 20 years old at this point.
Yeah.
So I have no idea how this ends. Like, what is the day that we're finally just like, I'm tired of talking into a microphone about, dumb shit that the Army does. But I guess like, I don't know. Sometimes I just think, I'll be done telling the Army how bad it is when the Army stops being bad.
Yeah, I mean, there'll come a time when our experiences are going to be hilariously out of date. Like, it would be very funny if there was a podcast of guys, going on and on about the military, and they all got out in like 1990. You know what I mean? So maybe that'll be us someday. But in the interim, it's been great, and it's going to stay great because we're going to keep doing it. Now, so Francis, this week you had a bonus in which you talked to Task and Purpose writer Haley Britsky about sort of holistic health, fitness, and a variety of physical training related stuff in articles she's written. So could you describe that?
Yeah, we kind of touched on it a little bit on our last week's free episode, but I got Haley to come on and really talk about the changes that the military is looking into with regards to physical and mental health of soldiers. Now that we're no longer at war, they're finally saying perhaps we should stop, doing this breakneck balls to the wall training where everybody is hurting themselves and getting fucked up for the rest of their lives, whether physically or mentally. So there's some changes they're trying, they're looking at, and Haley and I talked about some of those, what may or may not work, and hopefully we're going to talk to her in the future when some of these maybe get a little bit more implemented, but please enjoy this.
At the end of the day, it is a physically demanding job. There's only so much that can be done to get around that. And there are a lot of demands, no matter if you're jumping off an airplane or, any other job that you have, there's still, regular PT doing these things like that the average population, doesn't do quite as intensively or heavily or whatever. But it is, you're exactly right. Like the Army doesn't change things. The military, in general, doesn't change things quickly. And changing things in this way and the way that soldiers train and how they view health and fitness, that is going to take a generational change, because it's really changing the way that people think. And that's harder to do when you're talking to 40-year-old 50-year-old commanders about, hey, we need you to institute this change. And they are like, well, why? Like, I was doing that my entire career and I'm fine. And like, no, you're not fine. Like your knees are shot and like your back, like you can't bend over to pick things up without like groaning. Like that's not normal. And like, I think it's kind of changing that thinking of like, yeah, you went through it, but that doesn't mean the next guy should. That doesn't mean this new generation of soldiers should. And like they have a better chance at living better and being able to, go harder than you do, because they're not going to be wearing down their bodies quite as heavily. So it is going to take some time to really see, is this making a big change? What's the payoff here? How are we changing things? And I'll be very interested to see how that plays out.
When I went to Fort Carson back in 2014, they had a building that looked similar to this. Really, it just kind of looked like an updated gym, but they did have like a nutritionist there that you could talk to. Now, I'm curious, because the other article that I want to talk to you about is the article that you wrote about body fat and BMI and taping and the changes that are going to be instituted in there. However, in this area too, we have a nutritionist. And so, and I know there's always going to be, overlap, and there's, redundancies and maybe two things that are contradictory to one another. And certainly there are soldiers in the military who could benefit from nutritionists, not just in an overweight thing, but like, are you eating the right things to make sure that you have the protein and the carbohydrates and everything that you need there? But, when we're, did you get into the nutritionist aspect of it? Did you like what the plan for a nutritionist is in this new holistic kind of area?
So it's yes, but not for this article. So I think the article you're talking about is the height and weight requirements and sort of how they're reviewing in case they're going to make any changes. And I did get more into the nutrition aspect for an article I did in August, which was talking about eating disorders and disordered eating in the military, which very much fit into the height and weight requirements in the Army and sort of fit into the problems that sort of were leading to this review that they were carrying out at Fort Bragg. And for that piece, the nutritionists that I spoke with were, really wanting to teach soldiers exactly what you said, not just for losing weight as far as like what to eat, but, approaching food in a way that is not, I think the term they were using was like food neutrality, right? So like, it's not like good food versus bad food. It's just food that fuels you, and you need different things depending on what kind of activities you're doing. Something they mentioned was like, it's really difficult to get people to see carbs as fuel instead of like bad for you. And that's a societal problem, I think. Yeah. That's not necessarily just the Army.
Dr. Atkins kind of fucked us with that one.
Yeah. I mean, how many diets, like fad diets, have there been over the last like 20 years? I mean, I could name like 5 off the top of my head. And so it's just like, there's so many different things that they're battling and like trying to change soldiers' minds the way they look at that. And And so I think that's kind of that piece, the nutritionist piece of like getting people to see food as something that will fuel them to perform better, to run faster, to lift heavier, to feel more energized, not feel so groggy and tired, instead of seeing it as I have to only eat broccoli and like chicken and that's all I can eat. And because I have to lose weight. And it's like, no, there's like a healthier way to go about this that's giving your body what it needs and also helping you like accomplish your fitness goals. And so that is going to be a huge undertaking. I'm going to be staying on that for sure from the reporting side, just to see how that plays out. But that's a big part of what they're going for. That fits into the holistic health and fitness piece.
Now, and I'm curious about this too, and I don't know if you spoke to anybody about it, but there's, during my 20 years, there was always people who were doing like P90X or doing some kind, doing 5x5 weightlifting or something. Like everybody, or some people who were maybe a bit more fitness minded, want to do a little bit more than what the Army was offering at PT in the morning, would be kind of doing their own things. And, obviously we want to tell people, look, ketosis is not a thing you should do when you're in the infantry. You need to be able to eat an MRE and maybe 3 of them a day for the next month. You will not be ketosine for that. So is there also kind of a educational of like, look, all these things do not work. Please don't do them. Please do what we're telling you, because we have nutritionists on staff. We have these people who can tell you how to do your deadlifts or your exercises better. I guess is there a push towards that of like, don't look for something outside of us. Come look here because we have it for you.
I think that could be something eventually. Honestly, I mean, I know that not every unit has a nutritionist right now. That's kind of the goal. Like they want to roll that out eventually, but that includes so much hiring and all these things that, as we know, the Army, like we said, like doesn't move super quickly. So they're kind of rolling it out in stages. But I know the educational piece is a part of it. They do want to, teach soldiers what to look for, what kind of foods to be eating, how to think about eating and what they're putting into their bodies and things. I don't know that they're necessarily saying like, don't do these diets as much as like, encouraging like the positive side of like, look at it this way. Like, you don't have to do those things. Like, these are better ways to approach this. And so I think they're still kind of trying to figure out how to meet soldiers where they are and get that information across in a way that it really sinks in and like they're able to buy into it. And I haven't had enough conversations to really know all the educational parts of like what kind of classes they're doing, how they're talking to units and things like that.
Something that I noticed in the story that you wrote about this is that the people who are helping the soldiers out are all civilians, or at least it seems like the exercise people, the nutritionist people, all these people are outside contracted, or maybe they're hired as government workers. I'm not sure which way it goes, but is there a reason why they're doing it with civilians and they're not coming in from their own ranks and saying, hey, we've got soldiers that can teach this?
I don't know if it was necessarily intentional to like, we need to hire only civilians, but I think it, at least what I was seeing in the brigade that I was visiting at Bragg, they wanted to have civilians there because they're kind of approaching it in this way of like, professional sports and like the way that, NFL teams have like teams of trainers to help them. And, I asked them at one point, I was like, is part of this to kind of get some of the younger guys on board? And they were like, yeah, kind of. It's to kind of like, get like an 18-year-old really stoked about like physical therapy and stuff. It's like, okay, well, what if we tell them that like, well, the NFL players do it and like they love it. They love like PT and whatever. And they're going to be like, oh, yeah, that's exciting. So I think there's kind of that and changing the way people look at it. But then it's also just to have someone who is outside of their unit that they know they can go and talk to and get help from. that isn't like the person they're seeing every single day. It kind of gives some like separation to what they're working on, to their training. And they know like, okay, this person like has a degree in this, they studied this, they're an expert in this, and they're sort of the trainer for our team. Like we can go and talk to them and get help from them. And so I think it's just kind of trying to change the mindset in that way is what it appeared to be, and sort of what they were mentioning it as kind of like the goal there.
All right, as always, you can follow me at Army Strang, follow Nate at In These Deserts, follow the podcast at Hell of a Way. Check out the store, lots of stuff in there. And if you're not a Patreon, if you really enjoyed that, we have so much Patreon stuff. We're just constantly doing it, like once a week. There's always some new stuff. But even if you're not, we appreciate you listening. We appreciate you being here with us on this weird journey that we're doing. And hopefully everybody is debathifying. And if you've got a friend who like maybe maybe it's like this guy in Portland who's just like maybe you just need to listen to somebody who's on the left and listen to them talk about their politics. Maybe it'll debathify him a little bit. We'll see. I don't know. I can't guarantee you anything, though.
Yeah, that's for sure. But thank you to everyone for listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Take care.